What's going on, everyone? Today we have the Set 8 reveal for Teamfight Tactics Monsters Attack. We're going to go over everything, including all the new traits, all the new champions, all the mechanics, as well as the set's theme. So first, let's take a look at some of the traits. The first one we're going to go over is A.D.M.I.N. So when you have A.D.M.I.Ns active, you get a little selection choice here where you can pick how the trait actually works out. Each one has a cause and an effect. So we can pick one first, and when you get to 4 A.D.M.I.Ns, you get an additional one. So right as we add in Blitzcrank for, let's say, Galio, we get another choice, and then we get 2 options, and these change every game. It's just like a random selection. But just to simplify things first off, the 4 A.D.M.I.N champions from 1 cost all the way to 4 cost is going to be Blitzcrank as 1. He is an A.D.M.I.N Brawler. He creates an empowered field around himself, reducing all damage taken by 40% for 4 seconds. Next up is Camille, a 2 cost, who's also a Renegade, and Camille sweeps with her leg, dealing physical damage and disarming enemies hit for 1.5 seconds. Next up we have LeBlanc. LeBlanc is an A.D.M.I.N, Spellslinger, and Hacker, and her ability is Sigil of Malice. So LeBlanc fires 5 sigils at her target, dealing 80 magic damage, and if the target dies, she continues casting at the nearest target and casts 1 more sigil. Lastly, we have Soraka. She's a 4 cost and also a heart, and her ability is Star Call. So she launches a star at her target, and each star deals 280 magic damage and heals Soraka for 10% of her maximum health. Every 3 casts, she launches 3 stars at the nearest enemies instead. So she's a bit of a two-way player. Next up, we have the Anima Squad. When an Anima Squad champion kills another champion, they pause to celebrate to build fame for their team, and Anima Squad champions gain attack damage and ability power plus maximum health according to their shared fame, and that increases as you play more of them. So Anima Squad has 5 different characters, starting off with Silas, who's a 1 cost and also a Renegade. Silas's ability is Battle Blast, where he whirls his blades around him, healing himself and dealing magic damage to nearby enemies. Also in the Anima Squad at 1 cost is Nasus, who's also a Mascot, and his ability is Bonk. He slams his staff on his target, dealing 200 physical damage and slowing their attack speed for 40 seconds. Next up at 2 cost, we have Jinx. Jinx is also a Prankster, and Jinx fires a rocket at her target that explodes on impact, damaging enemies and stunning them. Vayne is a 3 cost, and Vayne is also a Recon and Duelist, and once she reaches 40 mana, Vayne fires a bolt at her target, dealing true damage based off her attack damage and AP. Next up we have Riven. Riven is a Brawler and Defender as well, and Riven's ability gives her a shield and empowers her next 3 basic attacks with bonus magic damage, and if her attack currently has less health than her bonus magic damage is increased by 100%. Last up we have Misfortune. She's like the AP carry of the set, I'd say, and she's also an ace. We'll go over those later, but her ability is Bullet Time. So Misfortune channels for 2 seconds, firing 8 waves of bullets in a cone in her target's direction, with each wave dealing 65 magic damage to the first target hit, and enemies hit by the bullets in a short succession take additional damage per bullet instead. Next up we have Arsenal. This is Aphelios. Aphelios is also an Oxforce and Sureshot, and his ability is Binding Eclipse. He casts his 4th Lunar Bolt Spotlight towards the largest group of units, dealing physical damage and stunning all enemies in an area for 1.5 seconds. And when you put him in play, you get to choose an ability. So these are 3 of them right here. So he could unleash a wave of energy, he can cast forth a Lunar Spotlight, or enters an Onslaught. You could pick and choose each time, and you could actually put him on your bench and take him out in order to choose new abilities every time. So depending on what you need, you could just swap him in and out and just choose whatever your team needs that fight. So as an Arsenal, there's only 1 of them, it's Aphelios, and Arsenals pick up the weapons they equip when placed on the board, changing their spell's effects. Next up we have Fiddlesticks, who's corrupted and a threat. So Fiddlesticks' ability is Dark Harvest. He teleports into the largest cluster of enemies and fears them for 1 second, and for the next 5 seconds he drains life from nearby enemies, dealing magic damage per second and healing himself for a percentage of that damage. If you think about like set 1 Swain, that's kind of what Fiddlesticks is. He's like a legendary drain tank. So for corrupted champions, there's just Fiddlesticks. He starts combat dormant, and then when an allied champion dies, during this time, Fiddlesticks absorbs their soul, granting him ability power, and after falling below 40% health or when all allies have died, Fiddlesticks comes alive. The next one up is Civilians. So Civilians, if there's a civilian alive, all allies are inspired to fight harder to protect them, gaining mana every 2 seconds. And it goes from 1, 2, 3. So first off, we have Galio. He is also a Mascot, and his ability is Out of My Way. He steps back and dashes towards the nearest enemy, dealing magic damage, and then he grants himself and closes ally a shield for some seconds. Sivir is a 2 cost. She's also a Sureshot, and she has a pizza delivery. She essentially just throws her disc out and it splits into slices and gets delivered to the 3 nearest allies. Lastly, we have Janna. She's a civilian and forecaster, and her ability is Twister. She sends out a Twister towards the largest group of units, and enemies caught in the Twister are knocked up, and when it stops, it expands to all nearby enemies, and they're knocked up again and take magic damage. For forecasters, we have Janna. She's the only one, but you guys may have noticed this little icon on the bottom right. It used to be for Mirage, but now it is for the weather forecast. So every game, there's a different way that Janna buffs your team. So for windy weather, forecaster champions grant adjacent allies a buff that increases their AD and AP by a certain amount every 5 seconds. And you can see around her, there's just like a bunch of hexes. You could just place them around there and they get buffed that way. So now let's go on to the Gadgeteens. Gadgeteens, every round they generate a random modified weapon that can be equipped by any unit. These weapons are powerful but not durable and fall apart after 2 rounds. So the one we got now is the Overflow Air Giant Slayer. I'm not sure if that's the official name, but it's pretty much Giant Slayer, but it's a little better. You know, it's more than 1 maximum health. They deal bonus damage. That's better than Giant Slayer. But starting off with the units, we have Poppy, Gadgeteen Defender, Buckler Toss. This is the old Poppy. She just throws her shield at the furthest enemy, dealing a % of her armor as magic damage. Next up, we have at 1 cost Lulu. She's also a Heart. Glitterland, she fires a bolt of magic energy at her target, dealing magic damage to the first enemy hit and also to subsequent enemies. After that, we have Annie. She's kind of like a tanky mage caster unit. Her ability is Burst Shield. She fires a cone, dealing damage in front of her, and then creates a shield on herself. Next up, we have Zoe. She's also a prankster and hacker. Trouble Bubble is her ability, so Zoe launches a bubble at the nearest non-infected enemy's location, infecting all enemies hit with a virus that deals magic damage over 10 seconds. Infected enemies take 10% more damage, so she's great at buffing up your allies. Notice how our Giant Slayer wore off after 2 rounds, and we got a new item. Rapid Fire Cannon, spring-loaded. It's just a better rapid fire cannon, so you always have to be adjusting. Last up is Nunu. He's a Gadgeteen and Mascot. Nunu, he just rolls his ball around all over the map, dealing magic damage to everyone he passes through. If you guys remember Singe from set 2, he's pretty much that, except as the round goes on, his snowball gets bigger and bigger, increasing the damage and speed and radius of the ball. Next up, we have LaserCorps. All LaserCorps agents are assigned a combat drone, and when attacking or being hit by an attack, the drone has a 50% chance to deal magic damage to the agent's target on a small cooldown. So when a LaserCorps agent dies, their drone is reassigned to the nearest living LaserCorps agent, and pretty much, yeah, as you scale up, it just deals more damage. So a lot of champions here. I believe the 1 cost is Renegade. He is also a brawler, and he just empowers himself and gains max health, causing his attacks to deal a % of his max health as bonus magic damage. After that, we have Ashe. Ashe is Recon as well, and her ability is Ranger's Focus, and she increases her focus for the next 4 seconds, gaining attack damage for that period of time. After that, we have Yasuo at 2 costs. He's also a duelist, and his ability is Steel Tempest. He fires a whirlwind at his target, dealing magic damage and knocking up units hit. And then, if his current position isn't the best, however that's defined, he will dash up 1 hex and find the most units in a line. After that, we have Senna. Senna's a 3 cost Sureshot. She fires her laser beam in a direction of a nearby enemy, dealing physical damage to all enemies in a line. After that, we have Sejuani. She's a tank of the group. She throws a grenade at the closest enemy that explodes after a 2-second delay. Enemies within 3 hex radius are dealt magic damage and are stunned. Zed is kind of a carry. He's a duelist and hacker, so both Yasuo and Zed, both duelists. He teleports behind his target, marks them for death, shredding armor for 6 seconds, and then he enters an empowered kill mode. And while that's active, his attacks deal bonus physical damage for every 3rd attack he damages all adjacent enemies, and pretty much he just does a bunch more damage. Last up, we have Mordekaiser. His ability is really cool. Mordekaiser transports the board into his realm for 4 seconds, shredding the magic resist of all enemies by 50% before summoning a big building behind him that slams onto the board and hits everyone. Next up, we have our Mecha Primes. Mecha Primes, they use the Prime Selector to designate a Prime. So at the start of combat, it combines 2 of the closest other Mecha units and takes 125 of their base health and gain additional ability and attack damage. And that's based off of how many Mecha Primes that you have. So this is the mech trait that they're bringing back. So definitely cool to see there. Starting at 1 cost, we have Wukong. He's also a defender, and he spins his staff around him, dealing magic damage to nearby enemies, and gains armor and magic resist for each enemy hit for 3 seconds. 2 cost, we have Draven, who's also an ace. He hurls his 2 massive axes in a direction that deals physical damage to all enemies in its path and reduces by 25% for each enemy that they hit. The axe reverse directions at the end of the path, dealing damage to enemies hit along the way back. 3 cost, we have Jax, who's also a brawler. Every third attack, he leaps to his target and deals bonus damage, and the bonus damage increases every third attack up to 10 times, and there's a little counter there as well. 4 cost, we have Set. He is a defender, and he begins charging up and becomes immune to crowd control, gaining a 400 health shield for 2.5 seconds. After the shield breaks or at the end of its duration, he unleashes a blast in the cone at the most enemies in range, dealing physical damage to all enemies inside, and it increases depending on how long he's charged up. So he kind of winds up a punch and then throws it out. Lastly, we have Leona, Deus Ex Machina. Leona locks onto and calls an orbital laser strike onto her target. Leona does damage this set, by the way. She's not a tank. After a short delay, a laser fires onto the locked target, dealing true damage per second to that target and 70 magic damage to nearby enemies. Next up, we have Oxforce. Oxforce, there are 6 of them. And for this, they gain attack speed that increases with their percent of their missing health. And Oxforce units, they fight to their dying last breath to defend their city, becoming invulnerable for 1 second the first time they would die in combat. So for the Oxforces, at 1 cost we have Talon. His ability is Auction Diplomacy. He just jumps to the furthest unit from the center of the board and stabs them, and if he kills them, he heals himself. Next up is Fiora. She's also a duelist. Fiora lunges at her enemy, dealing physical damage to all enemies hit, and she activates her duelist soul. And while it's active, she takes reduced damage. I believe it's 20%, and her attacks restore additional health. Next up, we have Annie. Already went over her. And then Alistair, he's also a Mascot and Aegis. Alistair slams the ground underneath his target, dealing 200 magic damage and knocking them up for 1.5 seconds. He then roars, healing himself and the lowest health ally champion for 15% of his max health. After that, we have Viego at 4 costs. He's also a Renegade, and he becomes unstoppable, leaping to the largest cluster of nearby enemies, slamming his sword down on enemies with the lowest health, dealing magic damage to the primary target and magic damage to enemies nearby. If he kills someone, he casts again with reduced damage. Last up, Aphelios. He's also an Oxforce, but we already went over him from before. Next up, we have Supers. There are just 3 of them. They're the reroll comp. So when you have Supers, 3 of them, they strike a pose at the start of combat, granting allies bonus damage, and for every 3-star unit on your team, the bonus is increased by 8%. So it shows the current bonus damage down at the bottom, so as you get more, they get more and more powerful. But we have Malphite, Lee Sin, and Gangplank. So starting with Malphite, he's a 2 cost, he's also a Mascot. He slams the ground beneath him, dealing magic damage to nearby enemies and granting himself armor for 4 seconds. Lee Sin, he's a Heart and Brawler, and if there's an additional nearby ally, Lee Sin dashes towards them, shielding both of them for 4 seconds. If there are no allies nearby, he gains a bigger shield for himself instead, and then afterwards he dashes back and deals physical damage to his target. Gangplank is a 1 cost, he's a Supers Duelist. His ability is Trial by Fire. He removes all crowd control from himself and then fires a flaming bullet at his target, dealing magic damage and reducing healing by 30% for 8 seconds. Next up, we have Star Guardians. So Star Guardians are back. They're a little different, but when a Star Guardian gains mana, they gain more. So if you have Blue Buff and Spirit Shojin, they're just going to gain more mana. They change these items, and we'll get into them later. Let's go over what the Star Guardians do first. So first up, we have Lux. She just throws a Lucent Singularity at a random target, and it detonates upon arrival, dealing magic damage and reducing attack damage of nearby enemies in the center. Next up, we have Yuumi. Yuumi is a 2-cost Mascot and Heart, and her ability is Prowling Projectile. She shoots a curved bullet to the furthest target in her attack range, dealing magic damage to the first enemy hit. After that, we have Rel. She's a 2-cost Defender. Iron Bond. Rel forms a tether between herself and her lowest percent health ally, dealing magic damage to all enemies between herself and the ally, and gives them armor and magic resist. After that, we have Kaisa at 3-cost Star Guardian and Recon. Her ability is Supercharge. So she applies Plasma, and then on her next attack against a target with 2 stacks of Plasma, she deals magic damage, and then when she activates her ability, she gains 50% attack speed for 6 seconds, and this bonus can stack. Nyla's up next. She's also a Duelist, and she whirls her Whip Blade, dealing 100 damage to nearby enemies while also healing herself and allies for a bit of health over 1 second, and then she finishes her burst with magic damage as well, so it's good to put her in between large crowds. Next up, we have Talia. She's a Star Guardian Spellslinger. She shoots a wall out, and it hits a line of enemies, dealing magic damage to all enemies hit. And after a brief delay, the wall explodes, dealing additional damage to nearby enemies. Echoes the 4-cost Prankster plus Aegis. Star Diver. He dives in, granting himself a shield and taunts nearby enemies. And when the shield breaks, he emits a time field, dealing damage to nearby enemies and slowing their attack speed for a bunch for 2 seconds. And lastly, we have Syndra. So she is a lot like the old legendary Thresh. She's also a heart, but she enshrouds a random unit on her bench in an orb and gives them a 30 health shield and flings them onto the board to the closest enemy, knocking them up and dealing magic damage to enemies hit. And traits are unaffected except for corrupted. So she's great at super late game type of situations. Next up, we have Threat. This is a no trait synergy. So they just are buffed up a little bit. So first up, we have Rammus. He has passive armor, and he empowers himself and leaps to the largest group of enemies, dealing magic damage to them. And he grants himself a bunch of stats, and he reduces their attack damage by 40% for 4 seconds. Next up, we have Cho'Gath. He essentially just shoots a beam at a bunch of people, and he also gains a bunch of magic resistance. So each threat has a kind of like a counter tech that you could just splash onto your team. And he breathes in a cosmic beam that deals damage and also increases their mana. So he's a great anti-caster type of person. After that, we have Aurelian's Soul. He calls down 3 meteors at a random enemy and explode on combat. Each meteor deals magic damage and applies a burn for 10 seconds based on their max health as true damage and reduces healing. So he's like your AP carry. Vel'Koz is great at anti-carrying, so he freezes the enemy champion that has dealt the most damage this round for 1.5 seconds and deals magic damage. After that, we have Bel'Veth. Bel'Veth dashes around her target and unleashes a flurry of 2 attacks, each dealing physical damage, and each time this is cast, Bel'Veth gains bonus attack speed for the rest of combat. Next up, we have Zac. Zac has a passive, and upon dying, he splits into 2 smaller Zacs with 40% of Zac's maximum health, and they taunt nearby enemies. So he's a great generic tank unit that you could throw in. And his ability, he bounces in the air and slams back down, dealing magic damage and a % of their current health to nearby enemies, and healing himself for 20% of his missing health. Next up, we have Urgot. He's a legendary, so his ability is Undertow. He fires 5 attacks per second, each dealing a bunch of physical damage. And his ability, he throws a gigantic wave behind his enemies, and it moves towards them, and it deals a % of their max health as magic damage. And when the wave hits them, there's a chance that you get some treasure. So you could get like items or things like that. So he's a really good late game type of splash unit. Last up, we have Fiddlesticks. He's a great drain tank, but we already went over him before when we talked about Corrupted. Last up, we have Underground. So Undergrounds periodically check in with the loot from their current heist. So you can choose to take a cut from this heist or run. And essentially, it takes 9 progress tokens to get a heist. So when you have 3 in, you get 1 progress token per win and 3 after a loss. When you have 5 in, like we do now, you get 2 per win and 5 per loss. So it's really, really critical to play around that. But you could also pass, and you get bigger loot as you pass and like wait for a bigger heist. So here with the heist, we can continue the run and get a bigger reward later. But with the units, we have Kayle, Underground Duelist. So she's a great item holder in the early game, deals physical damage and magic damage as well. Ezreal, Underground Recon. He has Sabotage. He fires an orb of physical sabotage at his target, reducing their attack speed, so he's a great anti-carry. And then afterwards, he shoots a thing at them, dealing magic damage to them and nearby enemies. After that, we have Vi. Vi has Blast Shield. She slams the ground in front of her and releases her stored energy, granting herself a shield, and reduces the armor of nearby enemies by 40% for 40 seconds, and deals a bit of physical damage. Next up, we have Sona at 3 cost. She's a Spellslinger and Heart as well, and she has 3 abilities. So she has magic damage, she heals the lowest target, and then she also stuns enemies. So she cycles between them. So the first thing does one thing, next one does the next, and the third one does the third one. Last up, we have Samira. She's an Underground Sureshot and Ace, and her ability is Flare. So Samira knocks up and juggles her target for around 1.5 seconds, and she fires bullets rapidly that deal a lot of physical damage, and the bullets also ricochet to nearby enemies, but they do reduce damage in that state. So for aces, we have Draven, Misfortune, Samira, and Mordekaiser, and this trait is only active when you either have 1 or 4 aces, so it's very similar to ninjas of the past. So pretty much those units just execute enemies under a certain health threshold, so really you're probably just going to be splashing one of these units in. I doubt you're going to be playing all of them. Aegis is the next one. All allies gain bonus magic resistance. Aegis units gain more. So this is the anti-magic tech. Arsenal, this is just Aphelios that we talked about. Brawler, Brawlers gain additional maximum health. So it's a little bit different from the Brawlers that we saw in the past. But these are Blitzcrank, Renekton, Lee Sin, Vi, Jax, Riven, and Sejuani. After that, we have Defenders. Shortly after the start of combat, Defenders taunt nearby enemies, and all allies gain bonus armor. Defenders gain more, so it's pretty much the same thing as Aegis, except for armor. That's Poppy, Wukong, Rel, Riven, and Set. After that, we have Duelist. Duelist basic attacks grant them bonus attack speed up to 10 stacks, and that's going to be Gangplank, Fiora, Kayle, Yasuo, Nyla, Vayne, and Zed. We're actually going to be doing a Duelist video later today, so subscribe below if you want notifications for that. We're just going to be posting that sometime this afternoon. Forecaster, we went over this with Janna. Pretty much there's different weather for each game, and Janna gives different buffs depending on that. Hackers, this is the assassin trait this set, so hackers gain Omnibam, and then hackers summon a Hackerim, or a Heckerim, that takes a unit in the Rider Hex into the enemy backline. The Rider is untargetable for the first couple seconds of combat, and then you gain Omnibam based on how many you have, and that's Zoe, Zed, and LeBlanc. After that, we have Heart. When Heart units cast their spells, all allies gain stacking ability power for the rest of combat. And that's going to be Lulu, Lee Sin, Yuumi, Sona, Soraka, and Syndra. So you want these units to cast a lot to buff up your whole team. That's like a pseudo support kind of. And then Mascot, this one's really fun. When mascots die, they retreat to the sidelines to cheer on their team. Allies regenerate a percentage of their max health every 3 seconds, increased by 1% for each cheering mascot. And Mascot regenerate double this amount. That's going to be Galio, Nasus, Malphite, Yuumi, Alistar, and Nunu. So you could have one up front, have some die really quickly, and then have like your main tank kind of really benefit from that healing and just have them live forever. For example, you could suicide your Galio and Nasus and maybe play your Nunu, and then Nunu is going to be hopefully carrying the fight after that. Prankster, this one's really fun. When a champion would first fall below 50% health, Prankster spawn a target dummy, move to a safe location, and restore 500 health. And then if you have 3 Pranksters, the enemy who kills the target dummy is also stunned for 1.5 seconds. That's going to be Jinx, Zoe, and Echo. Next up, we have Recon units. So they gain attack range. This is like the range default trait for this set. And then before casting, if there's a nearby enemy, Recons will dash to safety. They also gain bonus critical strike damage. So you see that down here. And then we have Ashe, Ezreal, Vayne, and Kai'Sa for that. Renegade, Renegades deal bonus damage, and the last Renegade standing deals more. So this is like a last man standing type of comp. Sylas, Talon, Camille, Viego, and Leona, and then they get the bonus damage as listed over here, depending on what's been going on. After that, we have Spellslinger. So every 6 seconds, Spellslingers replace their next attack with an orb of magic flung at a random target, dealing 75% of their ability power as magic damage. Spellslingers also have increased ability power. So that's going to be 30, 60, and 100 AP. Just the default mage class of the set. Lux, Annie, LeBlanc, Sona, and Talia. Lastly, we have Sureshot. So every 5 seconds, Sureshots gain bonus attack damage for the rest of combat. And that's going to be 25% and 50% based on how many you have. And that's going to be Sivir, Senna, Samira, and Aphelios. Keep in mind, on my website, I go over my thoughts on every single champion. So we went over their abilities before, but I go over here like whether they are going to be a good item holder, whether they're going to be a good AP carry, AD carry, whether they're a good splash unit, depending on what state of the game is, what counters something else. Maybe someone's just a trait bot because they have a good CC ability. That's all going to be listed down here. Again, it's going to be all on my website, bunnymuffins.lol/set8. So do feel free to check that out in your free time. Let's get on into the next section. Now I want to go into some of the system changes. So on the neutral rounds, we get what's called an item anvil. So these come on the PBE rounds during stage 5 and beyond. So you could just use them and you get a selection of items. So it's no longer a random item from those rounds. So that reduces a lot of the RNG, I feel like, and gives you a lot more decision making. Next, after the stage 4 PBE round, we get a component anvil. So it's pretty much the same thing, but you get to choose which component that you want. Now they changed a little bit about the items that I want to talk about. So Infinity Edge and Jeweled Gauntlet. Infinity Edge no longer gives 100% critical strike chance. Instead, it just gives your abilities a chance to critically strike, and they give a bunch of stats. They also changed attack damage. So attack damage is no longer giving flat AD anymore. Instead, it's a percentage. So it makes a lot more sense to build AD items on high AD champions now. Jeweled Gauntlet does the same thing as Infinity Edge, except it gives ability power instead of attack damage. Protector's Vow it's now a more selfish item. In the current 7.5, it's a bit more of a team item, but this one, it just works on yourself, and it gives you like a ton of stats once per combat after you reach 40% health. Last up, we have Stride Breaker, or sorry, Guard Breaker. This is a new item. Instead of Banshee's Claw, they're removing that. You get this instead, and you get bonus attack damage and ability power. And then when you attack units that are shielded, you deal 25% more damage. So it's a great anti-shield item. Some other items they changed is Blue Buff and Spear of Shojin. Blue Buff, it grants 20 bonus starting mana and 25 bonus ability power, and after casting an ability, you gain 10 mana. Some of these aren't set in stone yet, like some versions of Blue Buffs say reduce their maximum mana by 10, so these are still being adjusted, as is everything in this video, as they balance the game. Next up is Spear of Shojin. This one gives 20 ability power, and every third attack restores 10 additional mana, so it's really not that much of a mana regeneration item anymore. So augments are staying, and instead we get hero augments. So we've talked about this before in the dev drop. Essentially, each hero augment has two themes. One is a carry theme, one's a support theme. So no matter what unit you get the augment on, it'll have some sort of use, and maybe we could see every unit being played as a carry and every unit being played as a support sometime during the set. We have the full list out here on the website, bunnymuffins.lol/set8, but everything here is subject to change. I will note though that some people might say like, oh, isn't it unfair if I get a 5-cost champion augment and someone gets like a 1-cost? Well, the way they're balancing that is everyone in your same game is going to get them at the same time, and they're going to be for the same cost tier, whether it be 1, 2, 3, or 5-cost units. Other than that, for augments, they're going to still be the same thing. The only new ones we have are the ones that are trait specific, but other than that, all the other augments are going to be familiar to you from before. So that's going to be it from me today. Let me know your thoughts down below on what you think is going to be your favorite thing about set 8. So in the playtests I've had already, I've noticed that there's a lot of horizontal synergies you could play. There's so many things you could just splash around, and it's not just the threat units. There are a lot of little traits you can kind of just play around with, because I don't know if y'all noticed, but a lot of units have 3 traits this set. So they're definitely doing a big experimentation. And also, the set's artwork is definitely a lot different. I feel like this set, in terms of like what units are doing and what the traits are, it's a lot more creative from before, as well as like the visual aesthetic. That's probably my biggest takeaway so far, but hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, I'm going to be coming out with a lot of set 8 guides in the near future. We have a tier list updated every Friday. We're going to be going over composition guides, coaching, game replays, everything of that nature. So do subscribe or like this video if you have not already. But apart from that, that's it from me for set 8 so far. Overall, my thoughts so far is that I'm just really impressed by the aesthetic for this set. It definitely looks a lot different from everything else. Gameplay, we'll have to see because I haven't played that much of it. But I'll see you guys on PBE. I'll try to stream on Twitch and hopefully go from there. But thanks so much for watching. I'll see you all later. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to share and subscribe, and of course smash that like button. Each like is an LP I gain before the next video.